Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Blow the trumpet in Zion, Zion. Sound the alarm.
Good morning and welcome to the Confronting Apostasy program. I am your host, Brian DeLory, and I thank you all for tuning into the program today. And on today's program, I'm going to be presenting part 2 of the message entitled Methods of Interpreting Revelation. And that's the book of Revelation. And not last night, but the night before, I was reading from an article on ChristianCourier.com by an author by the name of Wayne Jackson, and he wrote a fantastic article on this, and I was talking about the 5 methods of interpreting Revelation, or I would think you would put it 5 interpretive methodology. 5 methods of interpreting the book of Revelation. And I told you that there's 5 methods, only one is correct, but the most problematic of the 4 that are incorrect is the preterist view. And so this particular article is dealing with that very problem, because the preterists rely heavily on an early dating of writing the book of Revelation, and yet the preponderance of the internal and external evidence proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that the book of Revelation was written in about AD 96, 95, or 96, at the close of the reign of the tyrant or emperor Domitian. So I left off the other night with the writings of several early church fathers, Victorinus, Jerome, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria. These 4 men, the writings wrote several things pertaining to this subject, and all of them were in agreement that John wrote the book of Revelation no earlier than AD 96. For the preterist view to work, the book of Revelation has to be written prior to AD 70, because according to the preterists, the year AD 70 is the year when Jesus Christ returned to the earth, and all of the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation were fulfilled when General Titus came to Jerusalem and destroyed it. So in the view of the preterists, that's when all these prophecies were fulfilled. So if the book of Revelation was written any time after AD 70, then that disproves the preterist view, and there's really nothing left to use to try and support it, although they still do that, but there's nothing left. There's no foundation left, that you kick the legs out from underneath that view entirely when you prove that the book of Revelation was written in AD 96, not sometime prior to AD 70. So anyhow, that's what I'm dealing with in this program. And so I'm going to talk about the internal evidence that supports the late dating for Revelation, the evidence from the Bible. And I'm going to be quoting from Mr. Jackson's article, because he says it better than I could say it sitting here speaking extemporaneously off the top of my head. I'd rather read it from him and quote it verbatim because I don't want to leave anything out. This is very important. This is very important for people to know. So I'm going to start here with the internal evidence section of that article. And by the way, you can go to ChristianCourier.com and there's a search bar there, and you can type in when was the book of Revelation written and push search, and it'll bring up this article, and you can read it for yourself. Anyway, the internal evidence is this. The contents of the book of Revelation also suggest a late date, as the following observations indicate. The spiritual conditions of the churches described in Revelation chapters 2 and 3 more readily harmonize with the late date. The church in Ephesus, for instance, was not founded by Paul until the latter part of Claudius' reign, and when he wrote to them from Rome, AD 61, instead of reproving them for any want of love, he commends their love and faith. That's in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 15. And yet when Revelation was written, in spite of the fact that Ephesians had been patient, that the Ephesians have been patient, that's Revelation 2:2, they had also left their first love, and this would seem to require a greater length of time than 7 or 8 years as suggested by the early date. Another internal evidence of a late date is that the book was penned while John was banished to Patmos. It is well known that Domitian had a fondness for this type of persecution. If, however, this persecution is dated in the time of Nero, how does one account for the fact that Peter and Paul are murdered, yet John is only exiled to an island? And that is also pointed out by Eusebius, who is also considered to be the father of church history, chapter 3, verse 18, and chapter 2, verse 25. Then consider this fact. The church at Laodicea is represented as existing under conditions of great wealth. She was rich and had need of nothing. In AD 60, though, Laodicea had been almost entirely destroyed by an earthquake. Surely it would have required more than 8 or 9 years for that city to have risen again to the state of affluence described in Revelation. So there again is another internal evidence to disprove the preterist view of an early dating or an early writing of the book of Revelation. The doctrinal departures described in Revelation would appear to better fit the later dating. For example, Nicolaitans, and that's in chapter 2, verse 6, verses 15, were a full-fledged sect at the time of John's writing, whereas they had only been hinted at in general terms in 2 Peter and in Jude, which were written probably around AD 65 to 66. Persecution for professing the Christian faith is evidenced in those early letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. For instance, Antipas had been killed in Pergamum. That's in Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. It is generally agreed among scholars, however, that Nero's persecution was mostly confined to Rome. Further, it was not for religious reasons. So Nero's persecution wasn't against the Christians. It was for other reasons. And now we come to the part of the article where it talks about the arguments for the early date answered. In absence of the external evidence in support of an early date for Revelation, preterists generally rely on what they perceive as internal support for their view, starting with writing style differences. It is contended that the Gospel of John has a much smoother style of Greek than does the Apocalypse. Thus, the latter must have been written many years prior to the fourth Gospel, when the apostle was not so experienced in the literary employment of Greek. In answer to this argument, we cite R.H. Gundry. He's a Bible scholar, and he writes that archaeological discoveries in literary studies have recently demonstrated that along with Aramaic and Hebrew, Greek was commonly spoken among first century Palestinians. Thus, John must have known and used Greek since his youth. Okay? B.B. Warfield, another scholar, contends that the Apocalypse betrays no lack of knowledge of or command over Greek syntax or vocabulary. The difference lies, rather, in the manner in which a language well in hand is used, in style properly so called, and solution of it must turn on psychological, not chronological consideration. R.H. Charles, another author of the commentary on Revelation, and he's it's in the International Critical Commentary series, perhaps the greatest expert on apocalyptic literature, regarded the so-called bad grammar as deliberate for purposes of emphasis and consistent with the citation of numerous Old Testament passages. And Gundry wrote this in his book, whatever it is, doesn't give the title of the book, page 365. It might be noted that in the 404 verses of Revelation, Westcott and Hort's Greek New Testament gives over 500 references and allusions to the Old Testament. Finally, as McClintock and Strong, another two Bible scholars, point out, it may be admitted that the Revelation has many surprising grammatical peculiarities, but much of this is accounted for by the fact that it was probably written down as it was seen in the Spirit, while the ideas, in all their novelty and vastness, filled the apostle's mind and rendered him less capable of attending to forms of speech. His gospel and epistles, on the other hand, were composed equally under divine influence, but an influence of a gentler or more ordinary kind, with much care, after long deliberation, after frequent recollection and recital of the facts, and deep pondering of the doctrinal truths which they involve. So these are the reasons why the preterist argument concerning the Greek language can't possibly be true. It just doesn't make sense in light of what I just read for you here. Okay, we come to the part of the article where Mr. Jackson talks about no mention of Jerusalem's destruction. It is claimed that Revelation must have been penned before AD 70, since it has no allusion to the destruction of Jerusalem. Rather, it is alleged it represents both the city and the temple as still standing. In response, we note the following points. First, if John wrote the work near AD 96, there would be little need to focus upon the destruction of Jerusalem, since the lessons of that catastrophe would have been well learned in the preceding quarter of a century. However, it must be noted that some scholars see a veiled reference to Jerusalem's destruction in Revelation chapter 8, where the great city in which the Savior was crucified, Jerusalem, is called Sodom, not merely because of wickedness, but due to the fact that it was a destroyed city of evil. Second, the contention that the literal city and temple were still standing based upon chapter 11 ignores the express symbolic nature of the narrative. Salmon, another Bible scholar, says that it is difficult to understand how anyone could have imagined that the vision represents the temple as still standing, for the whole scene is laid in heaven, and the temple that is measured is only to compare, is the heavenly temple. We have only to compare this vision with a parallel vision of a measuring reed seen by Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 40, in which the prophet is commanded to measure surely not the city which it is stated had been demolished 14 years previously, but the city of the future seen by the prophet in vision. Nero is, we come to the part of the article now where Nero is associated with 666. Some argue for an early date of the apocalypse by asserting that the enigmatic 666, written in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, is reference to Nero. This is possible only by pursuing the irresponsible form of exegesis. To come up with such an interpretation, one must add the title Caesar to Nero's name, compute the letter number arrangement on the basis of Hebrew, whereas the book of Revelation was written in Greek. It altered the spelling of Caesar by dropping the YODH in the Hebrew. All of this reveals a truly desperate attempt to find a reference to Nero in the text. Additionally, Leon Morris has pointed out that Irenaeus discussed a number of possibilities for deciphering the 666, but he did not even include Nero in his list, let alone regard this as a likely conjecture. Noted critic Theodore Zahn observed that Nero was not even suggested as a possibility until the year 1831. In the view of the foregoing evidence, a very strong case can be made for dating Revelation at about AD 96. Accordingly, the theory of realized eschatology, which is grounded upon the necessity of the apocalypse having been written prior to AD 70, is shown to be without the necessary foundation for a successful defense, to say nothing of the scores of other scriptural difficulties that plague it. And that is the end of the article, and that is the end of this program. As I stated in the previous program, I am not going to tell you in tonight's program what the correct method of interpretation is. I will deal with that in tomorrow night's program, which will be part 3 of this series. I hope what you've heard tonight has helped you and blessed you and made you to understand, at least in terms of the methods of interpreting the book of Revelation, the preterist view is the most problematic and, quite frankly, nonsensical view of interpretation that one can subscribe to. And there's absolutely no evidence to support that interpretive method for the book of Revelation. And that's going to do it for tonight. And as always, until we meet again, I leave you with this reminder to keep the faith and to defend the truth. Have a good night, everybody.